The taste is gonna move ya. Take a sniff, pull it out. The taste is gonna move you when you pop it in your mouth. Juicy fruit is gonna move ya. It's juicy soft, it gets right to ya. Juicy fruit, the taste is gonna move ya.
Hello. Welcome to Disaffected Live on Thursday, May 14th, 2026. I'm your host, Joshua Slocum, and that was your vintage 80s commercial intro. Welcome, everybody. We have got a great conversation to have with you tonight. I'm going to introduce my guest. You know what? I'm going to bring her on here because I may mispronounce her last name. So we're going to have her do it. Hey, Lisa, how are you? Is it Lisa Davis or is it a different last name?
Well, we're going to say Davis. It's easier. It's my
Davis. Okay. All right. Very good.
The
Lisa
other one
is a
pathway into a lot of other dramas that we're not going to get into tonight.
Oh, okay. Oh, are you saying that we have enough dramas already?
I am. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Lisa is a licensed master social worker. She's also a viewer of the show. She's a friend of the show. And I don't think I'm telling any tales out of school, but she booked a client session with me. We had a conversation about a week ago. And she told me some information that I immediately said, would you like to come and tell the audience about this on the show? I was really pleased to hear what I was hearing. We're going to be talking about something called parental alienation. And I'll give my quick summary of that, but then we're gonna let Lisa take this because she has become the expert. Parental alienation is a term that I've heard for a couple of decades that refers to when there's an acrimonious divorce and a custody battle, one parent unfairly and deceptively maligning the other parent and recruiting the children into believing and repeating the claims that the other parent is abusive, is terrible, when these things actually aren't true. And the problem is the conflict is between the two parents in the divorce. It's not that necessarily one parent is horrible, although we often find that parents who make allegations that their spouse is terrible and they recruit their kids, it's often the alleging parent who is bringing the problematic behaviors into the relationship. So I had noticed parental alienation being talked about almost as, well, not almost all the discourse I saw around it before I talked to you, Lisa, was from feminist inclined women who claimed that there was no such thing as parental alienation. No mother ever poisons the mind of the child against the father. And even stronger, and this claim was very common, I ran across it a lot. Any lawyer or father who alleges that parental alienation is occurring is a misogynist, and his mere allegation is proof of his abusive misogyny. So it was like a perfectly sealed sort of thought, so you couldn't get in there. Well, I was talking to Lisa recently, and she says not only is that conversation changing, I mean, you might characterize it differently in the past than I have, but that there's work being done that shows a correlation between parental alienation in custody cases and a mother with borderline personality disorder. So that's what I understood from you. I'm going to turn it over and let you introduce it.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you so much for having this conversation. I'm really passionate about it. And as a parent, a step parent, my son has a step parent. So I'm like on all sides of this journey.
Yep.
I got into this quite honestly when I was witnessing these symptoms and these very aberrant behaviors. And as a mental health professional, I didn't know what I was looking at. So I did this, somewhat obsessive deep dive into what am I viewing? What am I witnessing here? With not only children in my own life that I'm, going to be vague about, but
Sure.
also clients that I have that are experiencing this. So it's somewhat like trying to investigate a mystery illness. So you're seeing symptoms and you don't know what you're looking at and what's the core, what's the root, how are we supposed to treat this, what's happening here to induce these symptoms. So my deep dive landed me in like in this pay dirt of these experts. And at the time, it was a couple of years ago, there it was a very niche set of like doctors, clinicians, even adult survivors of this phenomenon. And once you get into the algorithm, of course, the whole world opens up to you in that realm. So since then, it's actually keeps expanding. It seems like exponentially. The reach and the outrage about this, because from my perspective, it's an epidemic. It's affecting millions and millions of children. It's extremely abusive. It's a lot of research shows that it's on par with being sexually abused as a child. It's emotional incest, psychological incest with a borderline or narcissistic parent. And then I ran into doctors who had been dealing with this for years and years and years in the court system. And Dr. Craig Childress, he's not always well liked, but he's really an expert at this, and he's the one who
Mhm.
really nailed it down. That this is whatever. There's a lot of debate in this space about what you call it. Parental alienation is really highly and hotly debated. There's a lot of bullshit surrounding what we call it. Okay. So to me,
Okay.
it's like this phenomenon by any other name is still psychological abuse of a child. Whatever you want to
Yeah,
call it.
whatever you call it.
Yes, malicious, fracturing of attachment. That's another. I think that's a very accurate depiction as well.
Yeah.
If you want to call it parental alienation, you want to call it psychological abuse of a child. Sometimes it's joint persecutory delusion. But the reality is there are currently DSM diagnoses on the books already that a clinician that knows what they're dealing with should be able to detect the symptom set, and should be able to diagnose it and help the child. And there's a lot of people in this space that are operating it in a way that they're out of their realm of expertise, and they're really
Yeah.
doing massive disservice to children worldwide, really.
Okay. Let's do two things right up front.
Mhm,
One, I'd like you please to give your best elevator pitch definition of parental alienation. And
mhm,
then after that, I'm going to ask you, what are the symptoms that show up in children that
mhm,
may point to this? So first, how would you define it?
mhm. So it's a process where one parent unjustifiably convinces a child, manipulates them to reject a normal range parent. And I like to be very
Okay.
broad about this because in the US, you're allowed to be normal. You're allowed to not be a perfect parent. You're allowed to be a good
Right.
enough parent. It doesn't mean you
Okay.
should be axed because you're not a perfect, aligned,
Yes.
healthy parent, right? So unless you're doing active damage that can be documented, that maybe can be legally dealt with or whatever, this definition should be broad in my opinion. You should not cut a child off from a good enough parent for any reason, unless it's actively harming them in a profound way.
Sure.
Otherwise, you should be working with the parent, right? So it's basically many times I would say, like, I'm going to deal with like the most common scenarios. There's always outliers, right? But
Sure.
this generally happens when you see this pattern. It's a very strong pattern. You listen to adult survivors of this. They almost always had a parent where this starts. Sometimes it happens in a marriage. Most of the time, it happens when a divorce commences. So, and your work, that basically when someone decides to divorce or leave a spouse, they're what you have is a narcissistic wound or a borderline wound. Like you're making me feel super inadequate, or I feel rejected. So the normal people do get into a cycle of like fighting their spouse, and this can go on for a couple years, even with normal couples. What you find in people that are borderline or narcissistic, or a combination of both, they're cluster B, you'll
Yep.
find that this never ends. The 2 years goes by, the 3 years goes by, and these parents are literally their whole life surrounds vengeful wishes to devastate the parent that left them and that abandoned them. So, the idea is if you leave me, you're leaving my child. If you screwed me over, cheated on me, you've cheated on and abandoned the child. Like there's a fusion there between parent and child that there's no delineation. So
Okay.
so the parent sucks the child into this warped world of believing that their other parent, who's actually the more healthy parent most of the time, regardless of what they've done, they make them believe and manipulate them to believe that that parent is evil, wicked, dangerous, damaged, they're irreparably damaged, and that they're scary. So they induce this fear cycle in the child. And sometimes it's very subtle, and sometimes it's like the outright, the things you would think about, bad mouthing and telling the kid, overloading the child with adult information, things like that. So it can happen in different ways, but it's overall it's a psychological manipulation of a child, justifiable. And I will say this,
Okay.
even if it's justified, like even if you have a truly abusive parent, it is unnatural for a child to reject a parent, even if they're beaten. Usually the attachment system will strive harder to get that parent to love them and accept them and embrace them. So when you see the symptoms of this type of abuse, there are no other symptoms in all of psychology that mimic this. So
So what are those
educated
symptoms?
clinicians. So there's some debate on this. Some models like have 17 different behaviors that you see with this. But I think at the bottom line is what you'll see is an arrogant and haughty attitude by a child toward their rejected parent,
Okay.
which is profound. Like, it's not that, kids can be brats, kids can mouth off, kids, but you do not see this. When you see this at 8, 9, and 10, you see a child elevating of that child into an adult status where
A
I can
superior
judge.
position to
Yes,
that parent.
yes.
That is very unnatural.
Yes. And it's almost like they become like the surrogate spouse to their
Yep.
rejected parent, or to the borderline or narcissistic parent. And so you see them rejecting that parent, having an arrogant and haughty attitude toward that parent, judging that parent, condemning them. They will always say, these are my thoughts, my feelings. They will always claim independence. That is also very unnatural for a child of that age to have that level of intellectual independence. um, they'll display those sorts of things. They'll have those behaviors where they are rejecting, they are haughty and arrogant, they will condemn, they will say, they'll say things about the parent that are very adult like, that you wouldn't see a child. And it's really that stone cold, like no empathy, no compassion for that parent, which is also very jarring. It's very unnatural.
Strange from a child.
Yes. Yes. So basically they have been co-opted by the narcissistic borderline parent, and their whole personality, their attachment, everything has been co-opted. And so they basically enter into a joint delusion with that parent. That
Right.
this is an evil, wicked, scary, fearful. I mean, the things I have heard and witnessed children say, they will start to say that this person, they're evil, they're wicked, they're going to poison me, they're dangerous, they've molested me. It very frequently accompanies a false allegation of sexual abuse
Okay.
or some other really severe abuse. Yeah.
Is there, and I realize there's a whole
Mhm,
panoply of
mhm.
claims that can be made, but is there are there some typical and commonly heard? Well, I guess I'm going to ask it in two ways.
Mhm.
One, the parent doing the alienation, the parent who's grooming the child into this,
Mhm.
um, does that parent are there typical abuse allegations? Like most
Mhm.
commonly, they'll claim
Mhm.
that dad sexually abused her or dad
Mhm.
physically beat her. So I'm curious about that from both the parent and the child who's enmeshed. What are the most
Mhm.
common allegations that turn out to be unfounded?
Such a good question. So commonly, and this went on as I, researched this intensely through the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, where it's a phenomenon called a silver bullet divorce. Okay, this went on
Okay.
for decades, and what that entails is it's really, really treacherous that this occurred, and it still happens. But where lawyers, I would say, like a lot like feminist groups, um, and other people, okay, would teach clients to make a false allegation of a parent that they
Would this
were
be
seeking to
blatant?
divorce. Yeah,
Would this be
absolutely.
blatant? Would the
Absolutely.
lawyer be sitting there with the mom and saying,
Yes.
"We're going to claim that he did this,
Yes.
even if he didn't"?
Yes. Because they'll find
Okay.
some, there's a lot of like it's very nuanced, right? So it's like, oh, has he ever done this? Has he ever pushed you on the bed? Has he ever like there's so many
Okay.
ways you could claim it. Abuse is such a spectrum and it's
Yeah.
all terrible, right? But there are normal range things happen. Like there's reactive abuse and whatever you want to call it. Like
Sure.
there's normal things that happen in relationships. People scream, people like you could claim that's abusive, right? Slamming doors, things like
Right.
that. So it really can be anything, but they get coached to, and also people justify it because, hey, if I'm saving my child, anything's justifiable. So that's a big issue. So a silver bullet divorce entails making a false allegation or exaggerating, which is part of like the borderline, experience. It doesn't always have to be completely false. Sometimes it's completely exaggerated, making a claim that basically is false. And in the court system for many, many years, the American family court system is insane. It's very corrupt. It does not follow the Constitution. It does not follow the law. It's very subjective, and it's like a random new judge can just make a call and your life is screwed over. There's no due process. You can have your children swipe from you, and just by a false allegation and on um, just on a precaution, you can have your children removed. It's really, really corrupt. It's an issue right now, and there's a lot of outrage about it. But you can make a false allegation. In the past, for the last probably, I would say at least 30 years, when that happens, judges usually on a precaution remove the child from the accused parent. And because the court process is so slow, it takes usually 30 days or so to resolve those claims. It'll cost you a minimum of $3, $4, $5,000 to defend yourself. And parents get overwhelmed in this process. Well, once 30 days goes by, a child has been told for 30 days, your dad's scary, your dad's dangerous, he touched you, he abused you, he hit me, whatever the claim was, in 30 days, that child loses hope. And so they can effectively be alienated within that time frame and get scared because who wants to even, a child of that
Is it,
age, like they're
well,
completely at the
their
mercy of the
ability
parent.
to be sprung from jail and go home, right?
Right,
Because a kid
right,
experiences is
right.
going to jail, right?
hmm
Is dependent on them cooperating with this. That's wicked.
It's super wicked. And the thing is like the attachment system is a certain way. So it's very easy to manipulate a young child. Very easy. It's not that difficult to abuse and manipulate a middle-aged child, So and even
Yeah,
older
I know.
children, right? So but as a young, what you will find, what I have found, is that a lot of parents start this when the child is quite young. So they will just completely reshape memories. They will exaggerate. I have dealt with so much of this nonsense where children really believe that, my dad tried to kill my mom. My dad raped my mom. My dad molested me when I was younger. He taught me to masturbate. I mean, all kinds of outrageous shit that goes on. It's really disgusting. And then when you go back and look at the documentation of from Child Protective Services or the court, documents and transcripts, you'll find that like the stories are wildly different, from what the
Okay.
child told someone back when. But anyway, this is a really, it's actually was an easy way. It's a really huge flaw in our legal system, where parents could exploit this. And unfortunately, it's many times, borderline women that do this. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean there's not psycho, narcissistic men that are using, money or different things to manipulate or continue their coercive control or whatever.
Yeah.
But you will find the research still says that it's not a gender issue. I don't find that in my own
Okay.
experience to be correct,
I was just
but
about to
yeah,
ask you about this, but
yeah.
I want to just point out for the audience. I'm going to put up a couple images from videos that you may want to take a look at that Lisa has suggested as really good encapsulations of this issue, and you'll find that these videos I'm showing you on the screen are also linked in the description below this video. So if you want to watch these, I've listed them out. One of them here is called the Silver Bullet Divorce That Destroyed My Childhood, and the YouTube channel name is the Anti-Alienation Project. So
Mhm,
again, just look at the description underneath this video, and you'll get a link to these videos I'm telling you about.
mhm.
I was going to ask you, Lisa, what is the sex ratio breakdown, whether this is known and documented or
Mhm,
from collected anecdotal observation?
mhm. So any like the latest information you'll find about people will still make it a not, it's not about a gender or whatever. It's not about moms or dads.
We're
I
very eager to
yeah.
say it's not
Hmm.
about a gender, but only in one direction.
Exactly.
Only when women are being scrutinized.
Mhm, mhm. I do agree.
That,
Obviously, we all know horribly controlling narcissistic men, and they
mm-hmm.
certainly can do this, particularly with money. They can
Yep.
definitely oppress women, and they can use money to like lure children onto their side, all that. That certainly
Yep.
goes on, okay, in different ways.
I
And
have a
to
borderline mother, but my stepfather was also, yes, a
right.
narcissistic, violent, tried to kill my mother, did molest, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
those things did happen,
No,
even
I definitely want to like disclaim that certainly happens. There are controlling men that want to maintain control over an
Sure,
ex-wife or what have you, or just, have a narcissistic wound that she left me or she doesn't want me and they seek to destroy them for that does happen.
yeah,
I will say in this with my I would say a minimum of 200 hours of research specifically on this topic, not to
yeah,
mention the work I've actually done with people. That's just the research. I
sure.
think it's very skewed. Women more frequently do this. I think it's like a feminized version of like it's a bit of a like it's not petty, it's very damaging, but it's like I think in my experience and even what's out online, you will find the people that turn up to discuss it, it's literally 5 to 1. Their mothers did it over their dads.
I'm not at all. That's
Yeah.
about the ratio that I would have predicted.
Mhm,
Overwhelmingly, moms
mhm.
doing it with a smaller minority of dads doing it to
And I think
normal
dads do
range
it maybe in a
moms.
different way. Like, I think it's less common. It's not that dads don't pull shenanigans. It's not that they don't try to manipulate a child
Yeah,
to spy or to do this or that. I think this all out vengeful wishes. I want to destroy you. I will spend the rest of my life trying to manipulate my child to hating you and rejecting you. I think much of that comes from women. And I think men manifest this in a different way that's troublesome and controlling and different things. But it's not that, you get this sense from these mothers that do this that this is their whole life circulates around this and it never
uh,
stops. And in my own personal experience, when I first encountered this, I was able to help someone find a bio dad that did this, that had this happen to him, okay, like in the
okay,
90s. Okay. So this
okay,
is my entry into this. Is that okay if I get into that?
absolutely. Yeah,
Okay,
tell the
okay.
story.
So this is why. So I am, at the time I'm helping a friend who is married for years and is going through. This is almost always the story. Honestly, is that you go through a custody battle or a divorce. That's what instigates this. So that's also a big signal to people. It's like, did this happen before? Did you file reports on your spouse before? Did they molest people before? Did they beat you before? Because most of the time, there's been zero reports of molestation, abuse,
Just
domestic violence
nothing.
prior to, right?
Well,
But
let me let me
mhm,
play
mhm,
devil's
mhm,
advocate for a
mhm,
second. You can imagine that you can imagine that a mother who was, let's say there's a mom, dad, and a kid, and dad is abusive, and he does
mhm,
hit mom.
mhm,
From time to time, maybe he hits the kid, maybe something else is going on. But we all know that there are instances where, um, you know, the abused partner or the abused woman is just trying to get along, is scared to
mhm,
file a police
mhm,
report,
mhm,
and and she might say to that, well, this was the straw that broke the camel's back. I was afraid to file reports
mhm,
before, but
mhm,
it finally came to a point where I thought my daughter's life was in danger or her
mhm,
safety was in danger. So how do we meet that claim?
mhm.
How do we
I think
distinguish
I
that
mean, if
from,
people are doing if people are beating, I mean, I'm always really shocked about this because I'm like, why aren't we calling 911? Why aren't we filing police reports? Why aren't we taking photos of the abuse? You've got to have and I'm not saying it's
right?
not always clear cut. I think there's some very clever abusers. I am of the mind, when I listen to and I think about, the angles you take, am not for all women. I don't believe all women. I don't believe all men. I believe the
Right.
truth, right? So there
Yeah.
is evidence to these things. I have literally been involved in cases where people have claimed that an abusive man has cut out the breast implants off of someone's chest. Okay.
Okay.
And they've
You would
told
think
their
that would be
child,
pretty easy to confirm.
yeah. Okay. But yet, no, we're carrying on. Generations of people are repeating these stories with zero police report, ambulance, hospitalization, pictures. This obviously, if someone's going to cut the breast implants out of your chest, it's not going to be a surgical job. You
No,
would be able
you're
to
going to
prove,
show up at a
right?
hospital
Right.
because you'll
Or
be
you're going to
bleeding
bleed
out to
out. Right. Right.
right.
So these are the kind of nonsensical things that go down. It's sad though, because they go down
I'm sorry to be Freudian,
generations.
but
No, I mean,
of
it's
course that
absurd.
would be the claim. Of course the absurd claim would be
Hmm.
like, he cut my breast implants
Hmm. And by the way, no, that wasn't it. It was threw it across the room. Threw my breast implants across the. I mean, it's.
I'm sorry. But,
No, I mean, it's just, if it
this
weren't
is
so
just so
real,
stupid.
it's absurd stuff. But the sad thing is this nonsense goes on and on and on with no proof. So I'm like, so to your question, which I mean, obviously I'm not a psychopath. Like, I don't want any criminal or any abusive or controlling or insane person getting away with shit. So but I think it's so convoluted, and people that make these false claims or exaggerate, they really taint and murky the waters for everyone else who truly are victimized. And that is an egregious felony, an emotional, spiritual felony to do that. So I
It's a
am
good way to
very
describe
hard
it.
on people that do this, because it's the same thing with the Me Too movement or what have you. People that, oh well, I had sex with someone to get ahead, but now I regret it, so I'm going to turn it into sexual assault or whatever. This is a sin against the rest of humanity, and women who are truly dominated, violated, and truly are victims, of terrible things, which is not. It's outrageous, right? So anyone who's participated in their own victimization and not owning that is really a crime against humanity. So that's kind of where I stand on it. I think there's a lot of, if you are truly being violated, if there's abuse going on, you have to document it. You have to call the police, file police reports, document the incident, record. There's ways. We have a legal system for a reason, and it is to deal with
Yeah.
evildoers. So the fact
This
that
is
people can
important
just make
advice.
claims, yeah, yeah.
This is important advice. I mean, for anybody who's listening or watching, who unfortunately is in an abusive situation, can't get out immediately. I mean, obviously, you shouldn't just be allowing this to go on and take pictures and then let it happen
Hmm.
again. But however you
Hmm.
are, document actual
Hmm.
abuse like this. Build that
Right. Make
record.
reports. Even if you don't have a ton, you can report things. You can say something. You can reach out.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of resources for this. Legally, there's a lot of avenues to go down. So people that don't ever do that, and then they want to make these massive claims and a lot of them are super vague, and they're surrounding a child that's usually 3, 4, 5, where your memories are already kind of foggy. That's my experience as
Okay.
well. As a
Yeah.
lot of people institute these methodologies when the children are really young, they're impressionable. And I've had children tell me, well, I don't remember any of it, but I believe my parent.
Yep.
I believe my mom, I believe my dad, whatever. And they've just bought into that narcissistic or borderline parents narrative. And
Have
to
you ever met
reject
a
that narrative, yeah, to reject that is like to reject your whole reality. It's profoundly devastating, which a child is not going
Of
to do,
course it is.
you know.
Have you
So,
ever spoken with an adult who was victimized this way as a child, alienated from another parent, who formerly, maybe even as an adult, said, "Oh no, this happened. I believe my mom or my dad, whatever," but who then later in adulthood said, "And then I realized what happened." Have you ever spoken to a person like that?
so I have not personally had that experience yet, and I'll tell you. But with the video you showed earlier, the Anti-Alienation Project, that was started by
Yeah.
a girl named Maddie, and she is actually, not the first, but she's a big forerunner in that.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. This is it's an epidemic that is one of the most undiscovered insidious um, evils that's going on in our culture, in my opinion. It is affecting millions of children. It is so hidden that kids don't even know it happened. They believe what the parent tells them. So they believe my dad was a deadbeat. Your dad didn't love you. Your dad was a piece of shit. Your dad was scary. Your dad was violent. He assaulted me. And they grow up with a narrative and they have no idea until
How
they're
would
much
they?
older and they get a little hint. Exactly. So it goes on and on. Most kids are, we have kids everywhere wandering around that are everywhere, that are adults, children, that they have no idea that they've been manipulated to reject or buy into a narrative that is completely false. So Maddie from the Anti-Alienation Project, she is a total forerunner in this, in my opinion. I give her so much credit because she was raised by a mom that did this to her, and she had no idea till she was 28. And she kind of started
Yeah.
to do deep dive because of the internet and because of the information that's out there. People are starting to question. So she actually went to college campuses and really encourage kids to think. And then, now like everywhere you go, you talk to people about this, and people are like, that may have happened to me. That may, I don't know. So it's happening all over. And basically, to me, it's anything that, fatherlessness, and this is a bit of a rabbit trail we can get into some other time, but I lost my father as a child. Like, one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this is not just my personal experience of watching the insanity of this go on. Like, I had a front row seat to several situations like this, but I lost my dad when I was young, 10 years old. And so I had a very real sense that fatherlessness is horrible. It's
Yeah.
a plague. Biblically, I'm a Christian.
Hmm.
Biblically, it is, it's a curse.
Yes.
Fatherlessness. Now, God, of course, has an answer to that, biblically, that he's the father to the fatherless, and that he's a husband to widows and orphans. There's a lot of nurture
Hmm.
and care biblically for widows and orphans. So I was actually orphaned when I was young. So I could not fathom, as an adult, I had the opportunity to do this to my son, when his father and I split up. He was, there's plenty of grievances, that I could have absolutely built a case and justified doing this type of behavior. It never occurred to me because I knew how horrible it was to not have a father, to lose a father. Kids deserve to have an imperfect father. They deserve to know and decide for themselves what type of father. Now, obviously, if you're dealing with criminal negligence or criminal behaviors toward a child, that's a whole different thing, obviously, right? But when
Right.
you have a normal range parent, even if they're a little zoned out or they're inconsistent or they struggle or they've got some problems, kids deserve the opportunity to get to decide for themselves if they want a relationship with that parent. Severing a
Hmm.
parent child relationship should be an absolutely last resort for the court or for another human. That should be an absolutely last resort because they are
Okay.
truly dangerous to a child. Not an angry, mean, grouchy, none of that stuff. It should be
Hmm.
they are a molester. They truly, like, it's proven that they are, pedophile. They're striking their child. They are, they're terrorizing their child, things like that, right? Where they refuse to get help and participate in their recovery. It should not be for, there's just so many like gray areas in there that people do this and they justify it. And it's when you've lost a parent, you've lost a father at a young age, you're not as willy-nilly about severing those attachments. And I don't think that, I think it's unnatural to do so. And it should only happen
Yeah.
under the most, very, and it should be sad. It shouldn't be like vengeful wishes. It should be very sad if you have to protect your child from a dangerous parent. It should be grievous. You shouldn't have delight
Well,
in doing so.
no, of course. But this brings us into what I find to be one of the most interesting things that I learned talking to you recently that I want to talk with you about here with the audience is um, everything I'm hearing here. I mean, of course, as soon as you start describing these behaviors, the embellishment, the lying or exaggeration, the constructing false narratives, the vengeful vindictiveness, of course,
Hmm.
immediately I
Hmm.
hear borderline personality, right? I
Hmm.
mean, that just
Hmm.
strikes you right out. It's so obvious. But when we were talking recently, you told me there's been some work done, some research, some
Mhm,
examination that is backing up what my gut would have told me about this, which
mhm,
is that this
mhm,
is highly correlated with
mhm,
parents who have borderline personality disorder. I mean, this sounds like something when you who would do this? The first thing I said
mhm.
to the mother with borderline personality
Yes.
disorder. So what tell us about what people are finding
Mhm, mhm.
doing work on this.
Okay, so Dr. Craig Childress, he's a real interesting doctor, but he is the one that really blew this open for me, this whole topic, and actually outlined the symptom display that I was personally witnessing in a situation in
Mhm.
my own life where I was like, what is going on with this child? It hit every mark. And I thought, oh my gosh, this guy knows what he's talking about. Because not because it I only sought it out because I was seeing it and not knowing what I
Mhm.
was seeing. So he is the one that really opened this up to me and talked about, and now more people are, more doctor. There's a number of professionals and experts in this arena for a long time. But he's the one that correlated it, very directly to it's. I want to say like 40 to 50% of the time a parent that's doing this has borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder, which of course the root, he claims the root system is the same. The symptom, the display of these
Yeah.
pathologies are different,
I'm
but
having
it's
a hard time.
very
I'm
highly
having a hard time
correlated.
imagining any normal range person without a personality disorder doing this. I mean,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the part I have a harder
Yeah.
time thinking, how could a normal person do this?
No, I agree. And I think this is just the research is not, there's not a ton of research. This is just
Sure.
gaining some momentum in terms of like there is like proposed like litigation in all 50 states regarding like parents doing this. You have like for instance, what people were trained to do back in the 80s, 90s, to early 2000s that they were doing like making these false claims and stuff or taking off with the child because we're protecting them and all of those things. Now I know people and I've been participated in sort of helping navigate situations like this where if people did the things they did back then, now there would be an Amber Alert. There's for us, at least in Texas, there was like a rash of Amber Alerts a couple of years ago, and they were all parents who didn't return the child and who ran off with their child. So
Okay.
that's also a piece of that's
Oh,
how you
whoops.
see the display of that. Um, is that you see Amber Alerts of parents who are unilaterally deciding, I'm not going to turn over my child according to the court order. So they feel justified in running off with their children or kidnapping them and things like that. So
Yeah.
that's also something that's sort of, but there's for decades prior to the last few years, parents were doing this all the time, but there was no Amber Alert. So there's a lot of people that suffered and lost their children to kidnapping basically back in the day, but had no recourse but to impoverish themselves in the legal process.
I think we forget this. I think I've forgotten it myself to some degree, but of the of the children who are kidnapped, actually kidnapped,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
overwhelming majority are parental kidnappings, family
Hmm.
kidnappings. I mean, it's
Hmm.
only a,
Hmm.
I don't know the statistic, but I know that it's a very small percentage of stranger kidnappings.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely.
So
We
that's
saw
when you
so
think
much of
about
that
it. I mean, I
recently.
guess what this means is the majority of the time when you hear it, when you see an Amber Alert about a missing kid, it's a
Hmm.
parent who took that kid,
Hmm.
not some
Hmm.
stranger in an
Hmm.
ice cream truck.
Right. Exactly.
You
Yeah,
know,
it's no, absolutely. And one of the things that I've not mentioned because there's a lot of layers to this is that I worked with a doctor in Dallas for when I was going through my own custody battle years ago, which did not involve any parental alienation, but it was its own little process for a reason. But I worked with a doctor that all pretty much all the high conflict, which high conflict is code for for
cluster
personality
B.
disorders. Yeah,
Yeah,
cluster
I
B.
know. Yeah,
So
Bill
they
Eddy uses
ordered.
that a lot at the High Conflict Institute. Yeah, I
Right. Yes, yes, yeah.
yeah.
So I was, Dr. Barry Coakley was, sort of he headed up this really interesting group of parents the courts would order parents into when they would get into a high conflict custody, situation. And so I went through the process with him and his wife. They were both amazing. I actually became, um, you know, I was a mental health professional, so they sort of eventually took me under their wing, and I ended up co-facilitating groups with him for an additional 5 or 6 years. So I got a
Okay.
lot of exposure
Okay.
to the normal range of how people do go through. They get kind of crazy when they get divorced and you're fighting over your kids. People do get a little nutty. They do
Yeah.
out of character things. What you see is that after 2 or 3 years, everyone gets worn out with their bullshit and being hysterical and crazy and controlling. And they usually settle into like, okay, let me just get back to normal life and start being more reasonable. That's that's actually, I'm not saying it's healthy, it's just normal.
Yeah.
What you see with these cluster Bs that are truly diagnosable, is that they don't ever get back to normal. They never stop their bullshit. They go on and on and on. They terrorize the children. They use the children as a sword and a shield. They have a really very little regard for how anything impacts the child. In
Yeah, I
fact,
know.
one of the big things that you see is that there's a parent, like there's a swapping of role reversal, basically, where that borderline parent uses the child as their regulatory other. So they depend on that
Yeah, they
child to
use
make
the
them feel
child to
significant.
regulate their
Yes,
own tumultuous
yes,
emotions.
yes. And so that child exalting them as the beloved parent is everything. They absolutely require this. And the children know about this. And I think this is important to note is when you dive into Dr. Childress's research and all that, he talks about this, and I witnessed this quite a bit myself, is that you get these children and they will tell you, no, 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 these are my thoughts. I believe this about the evil parent.
Yeah.
But the thing is they'll tell you, oh no, no one says anything bad about my parent. But you can manipulate a child if you think about when you were a child, and I know you've experienced this, and you have a mother that's volatile and she gives you a look, or when you say something like, oh, I had a great day, and they're like, well, I didn't have a great day. Or, you don't have to say much. You can give a tone, you can ignore, well, you can just not take them for ice cream. You can do different things. It can be omission or commission. But
Yeah.
mothers and fathers, but I would say mothers even more so, you can send your child a message very clearly that this is the right answer and this is not the right answer. You can very quickly let your child know, I don't want to hear anything positive about dad. He was mean and nasty to me. And so the child will learn to adapt and only say what the mother or the father wants to hear. And they frequently do it on both sides, to survive.
Yeah.
So children are in survival. They are trying to survive a borderline or narcissistic parent. And that parent is propping themselves up as the beloved, amazing, angelic parent. But the reality is, narcissistic and borderline parents are not that. They have rage, they have all these things. And that child is they learn that I am the one that has to calm my parent. I have to serve up what they need because they're vulnerable, they're unstable, and I have to do whatever it takes to make them okay. And they feel as though many times that their other parent deserted them and left them with this unhealthy parent that they couldn't handle, right? Which is legitimate. I think this is one of the most legitimate things that these children have to deal with is that a father or mother that couldn't deal with a borderline or narcissistic parent left them, but then they left their child with this very unhealthy parent. So
It
now that
happens all the
parent,
time. It
yeah.
happens all the freaking time,
Hmm.
and that's one of the and I think this is a father's sin. I talk a
Hmm.
lot
Hmm.
about what mother's sins are,
Hmm.
and I do that for a reason. It's not, obviously that was my personal story, but it
Hmm.
is a fact. It
Hmm.
is an objective fact that
Hmm.
maternal abuse of children is nowhere near as covered and talked about
Hmm.
as
Hmm.
paternal
Yes.
abuse is. So we have a very big raging gap in this
Hmm.
conversation that everybody doesn't
Hmm.
want to talk about. But on,
Hmm.
leaving that aside, you know, the number of that, and this comes up with my clients too, people who come to talk to me about these issues so often. there's a borderline or narcissistic mother, and a father. Sometimes the father is a complementary cluster B.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Sometimes,
mm-hmm,
uh, I think probably most frequently what I see are fathers I would call morally weak. They
mm-hmm,
enable and then they
mm-hmm,
run away when they don't want to
mm-hmm,
take it anymore.
mm-hmm,
But they're all leaving the children
mm-hmm,
with this woman,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I see this a lot, and I know that I can imagine that some fathers have a legitimate complaint. They've been screwed over by the family court system, and don't have a lot of control over that. But I think I've also seen a lot of, well, I'm just going to throw my hands up in the air. I can't deal with her. Well, then why
Mm-hmm.
do you think it's okay for your daughter to have to live for 18 years with this?
Yes, correct. I completely there's culpability all around in the court system with fathers, with mothers. I mean, there's plenty for everyone to be doing their work,
Yeah,
you know. The mental health professionals that are involved with the court appointed therapists and evaluators. There's so much culpability. There's just people should not be working with this population to begin with in a professional way if you do not have this level of education. Because the symptom set that these kids display is not seen anywhere else in all of psychology. So that alone should disqualify a
that's
lot of
very
people.
interesting.
It is not found with kids that are beaten, kids that are sexually abused, kids that are in any other way abused. If you find the symptom set that's related to, we're going to call it malicious fracturing of attachment
Sure.
because it's an attachment issue, or parental alienation, those things are very specific. So if a child is displaying those symptoms, you can know without a doubt they're being psychologically abused by a borderline parent.
The one
Period.
that jumped out to me,
Hmm.
and it jumped out to me when we had our conversation last week, and when you said it today, that just is so obvious to me. This arrogant or haughty attitude
Mhm, mhm,
it's so jarring because
mhm,
you're right. That's not what a 9 or 10 year.
mm-mm,
That's not the emotional affect that a nine
mhm,
or 10 year
mhm.
old child almost ever has toward, even if you hate your parents, right? Whether
Right,
you hate your
yeah,
parents for good reasons or bad reasons, you you don't see arrogant haughtiness.
mhm.
That's
Okay,
really
so and think
interesting.
about a child that's like a parent hauls off and slaps or hits them or is like scary or an alcoholic or a drunk and, just
Yep.
causing you do not see this in children. Okay, you maybe when they're grown teenagers, right? Like you might see some
Yeah.
of that pushback, okay? But with kids, you see them desperately seeking to attach, seeking to appease. You see them fawn. You see a
Yes.
fawning
Yes.
behavior, okay? That is what you see in a normal situation. You see kids, you know why they fawn? Because they're trying to save their own life. They're trying to
They're trying to
survive.
survive.
Okay.
Yeah, they're
You
trying
do
to
not see
placate the monster.
haughty, right? You don't see haughty 9, 10-year-olds saying, fuck you, you're a piece of shit. Da, da, da. You don't see this in 9 and 10-year-olds unless you've got this other going on. So
Absolutely. You're right. I mean,
these
that's so
symptoms are,
obvious.
yeah, they are. Dr. Childress calls them the fingerprints of pathology.
Yeah.
When you lift those fingerprints and they match, this is what you're looking at. The fact that I had to learn this sort of like by fire, and that I deal with mental health professionals and people are working in courts with these families day in and day out, and they do not know what they're looking at is egregious. And it's being, there's a big movement happening, to reform the laws surrounding family court, to find, because you've got people that are being assigned to things, and it's a racket. There's a family court racket going on. A lot of people don't know that, child support, for every dollar that's collected in child support, the federal government gives states like 60 cents on the dollar. So
I had
there's
no idea.
it's so corrupt, you would not believe it. There are many people learned how to do a silver bullet divorce from their lawyer. All this is criminal. I mean, you are just screwing children over to, profoundly changing their lives,
Yeah.
and creating fatherlessness. I mean, my therapist, Dr. Coakley, that I worked with until he retired a few years ago, that worked with all of these kinds of families in Dallas and Fort Worth. He said he called these people orphan makers, and I was like, this
That's a
is
good
a
one.
crime. They call women that do this. They call them death mothers. they call, of course, we all, we hate a horrible man. We hate all that's always the drum is always banged on. That's why we kind of focus on this other thing because mothers get venerated, and a lot of, we somehow have this idea that they can't be wicked or evil or put themselves their vengeful wishes ahead of their child's well-being, and they do it all the time,
They do, and
and
and unfortunately, I would suspect that this kind of, well, obviously this kind of behavior is much more common in our contemporary era because we've all grown up and lived in the world of no fault divorce, right? So
Mhm,
it's
mhm,
very easy, comparatively, to get a divorce, and that changes the incentive structure for all sorts of family decisions. But I would guess that this kind of mother initiated alienation, destruction of attachment, it's probably far more common than it would be otherwise, given the fact that and my my sense is the mother figure is the most primary attachment and
mhm,
relationship in
mhm,
a human being's life. This is the woman who carries you around inside of her
mhm,
for 9 months
mhm,
and gives birth to you, hopefully breastfeeds you, cuddles
mhm,
you. You know the sound of her voice before
mhm,
you're born because
mhm,
you've heard her while you're in the womb, right?
mhm,
So there's a reason based in nature
mhm,
why we would venerate mothers, why we would be
mhm,
very protective of the status of mothers.
mhm,
But then you add to that a society which, since at least I would say the mid 20th century, the 50s to the 60s, has taken a decidedly toxic feminist turn. And by feminist, I don't
mhm,
mean, people who listen to me regularly know what I think about feminism. But for those who may be a little newer to this, when I say feminism, I am not using a synonym for equal rights and women get to vote and blah, blah, blah.
right.
That's all given. That's not what I'm
Mhm,
calling feminism. That's not feminism.
mhm,
Feminism in our era, in my view, is female narcissism. It's female supremacy and female narcissism that is given a respectable social name and reputation. But we have been living in an era my entire life when women are, and it's feminist thought. It's taken over everything. I see almost as much of it on the conservative right as I see on the left. That is how deeply feminist thought has
mhm,
seeped into the fabric of our society. This is, I'm sure, encouraging many more women to behave this way in divorces who would not otherwise with other societal guardrails if this kind of female bad behavior were not so tolerated or ignored. But
mhm,
that's my
mhm.
speculation.
I totally agree. I think, I've always felt because I was orphaned, because I did live without a mother and a father halfway through my childhood, because I did have the opportunity to become this type of a mother and actually be somewhat justified, quite frankly. Like my situation was, I could have justified myself,
Yeah,
and I chose not to ruin and destroy my son painstakingly. I sacrificed to not do that. So
yeah,
I feel a certain way about it, right? So then,
yeah.
I never finished the story, but the way I even got introduced into this is that um, I have several people I work with currently. I have a front row seat to a number of these situations now. But the first one was at the time a friend who was getting divorced and was like, this weird thing's going on. I got arrested at my child's daycare, and accused of this abuse situation or whatever, which turned out to be, just a basic fraud, right? That the judge was like, I don't believe you, you changed it, So it was bullshit, right? But it all came right on the heels of a divorce and custody battle. That's a really big sign. Never before, always at that time, right? And then he was so curious about it that he said he told me the whole backstory. He's married to this person for almost a decade, and he had heard this story about her bio dad. So we decided to find her bio dad, and didn't take long because he was right there in the open. Well, he had heard that this man was a butcher, had cut out the breast implants, the story I told you earlier, that he had molested his daughter, that he was a brutal monster who'd been imprisoned, and that this friend of mine had to care for, and you have to protect, this woman against this terrible predator, et cetera, right? But when 10 years later, when this happens to him, he got curious, about the story that he had heard. Well, we find this man and his lovely wife and his grown children and a daughter and a huge family. And we found out, long story short, when we went to meet with this man and his grown son, and we didn't say one word. We sat and listened chronologically to his story about what happened to him. And it was eerie, so similar to what was going on. And he told us right out, they're never going to stop doing this to you. And the stories, then we ended up talking to so many other family members. Well, what happened with this is that this couple was together, and when this man would not marry his wife for the third time, if that tells you anything about the toxicity of their relationship, he wouldn't marry her a third time. He chose to marry another woman, and she got pregnant. The minute that woman got pregnant, this started. Okay, so it never stopped. The stories and the documentation the man kept. I mean, the court transcripts, the records, the stuffed animals, the pictures, he saved everything. And his giant family, extended family, you know, basically could, also testify to this.
Hmm.
When he fought back, and he had a great lawyer, and he fought for years. And at that time, again, they didn't have Amber Alerts, they didn't have all that. So eventually his ex-wife kidnapped their child from school when she was 7, skipped the state. And when the state of Texas went after his daughter who had been kidnapped, they skipped that home, disappeared, and moved to, you know, off the mainland. I'll just say that.
Okay.
Okay. So he fought until he was completely impoverished, till he almost ruined his other family, and finally had to sign over his rights, to his daughter, which and I don't, I disagree with, but this was back, back in the day. And he had nothing, no other recourse. Now, if that happened today, there would be an Amber Alert for a missing child. Okay.
Okay. Well, it's
So
good that we've made
that's
some progress on that.
right, right. So it would destroy their family. The entire family basically had a 7-year-old child from their family kidnapped, the grandparents, the cousins, the other siblings. And the next time he saw his daughter was in a custody battle with my friend. He testified in court to a jury about what happened to him, and this friend of mine got full primary custody of his child because she was repeating. So, which takes me to another thing. What we found out from that man is that he had also gone to seek his ex father in law. So, we found out this is at least 3 generations deep, where the mothers claimed the dads had sexually abused their child when they got divorced. So, the silver bullet
This
divorce thing goes back and back and back into I think the 70s.
this makes me, I mean, and I don't, there's probably not an answer to it, but this raises
Mhm.
a question for me. I wonder if there's been enough of this behavior to have an effect on the statistics that we think we know about rates of
Mhm.
family sexual abuse. I
Mhm.
wonder if it has disturbed our understanding.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know how you would know that, but it's
It's so
worrying.
disgusting and convoluted because sexual abuse is so common. It's so sad and so disgusting and so detrimental. And it's so common. But then because it's so common, you can have these, equally evil people drafting off of that statistic and off of this tragedy, and borrowing the outrage, that is warranted, right, and is
Yes.
true and good, right, and they're borrowing that because that what happens in our court system is that people are losing custody of their children on a precaution. So all you have to do is say this happened, or like this is like nitty gritty, but what happens, and I've heard this several times, is that a toddler child will like touch their genitals or rub their genitals, and they will make a claim that they're masturbating or something, which is really common for toddlers, believe it or not. They have no idea what privates are or whatever, and so people
Yeah,
will
if
do
you've ever been
anything.
around a toddler or had younger
Right,
brothers or sisters, you will know
right,
that toddlers stick their hands down their pants.
right. And so you'll take something as simple as that, and it's
I think we've
What if
got a
you do
bit of
have a
an,
weird predator? Mhm.
yeah, I think our internet is catching up a little bit.
Okay.
I think you were saying, what if you do have a predator?
Yeah, it's just it creates such a terrible convoluted situation because this really obviously if you have a child that is being abused sexually, that
Hmm. Of
should get every resource known to man,
course.
deployed to address it. But when you have people that, because it's so egregious, and you have people that are willing to co opt that accusation for their own vengeance, because they care about vengeance, or they delude themselves into thinking they're doing well. This man's a piece of shit, or he's a jerk, or whatever, and so you
Hmm.
feel like it's your right to terminate that
Yep.
god-given connection to a normal range person. We're not talking about monsters, right? Like, and if you have a
Right.
monster, you need to prove it's a monster. You can't just unilaterally decide this person is too much of a piece of shit to be a redeemable parent. You know what I mean? You have to have
Yeah.
some level of proof, some level of standard, right? And it can't just be your whim, you know? And that's really what we're dealing with.
So we've come up on an hour here.
Mhm.
What I want to do, I want to take a quick break. So I'm part of this live stream, Lisa. This is your first time on.
Mhm. Mhm.
Maybe it will be only your first of many times. One thing about this live stream, though, is that the audience is used to the fact that I will always have to go to the bathroom at least one time. So what we're going to do
We'll
is to
allow
take
it.
us off this. We're going to take a quick little break here. I'm going to take everybody off the screen. Everybody can get a snack and stuff. But audience, I want to open this up to you. If you have questions for Lisa, questions, comments, things, this is the time. Now you're willing to take some audience questions, I'm sure, right?
Sure, of course, of course. I'll try
Okay.
to answer.
So yeah, put them up here. We're on 3 platforms. So we're on YouTube, Rumble, and Twitter. My sister is usually my co-pilot who wrangles the comments and gathers them up for me. But today I'm flying solo, so I have to pay attention to the things. But if you give me a couple of minutes, I'll come back and look at your comments, and we'll bring them to Lisa. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll see you guys in just a minute or so. Well, it put me back on here anyway. Oh my goodness. Okay. Be with you again in a sec, folks. All right. And let's see what you guys have got up here for us. Let me take a look over the comments here, see what you all have been talking about that I have not been able to put eyes on. There, Lisa's back with us too. Let's get her on the stage. Okay, welcome back. Thank you. So we got a couple here. Oh, and even paid for these comments. Well, thank you very much, sir. $3 and then another $3. I almost have enough for a value meal. The Fox So Cunning and Free says alienating parents will not confine their mendacity to the family court. They can and often will attempt to enlist police and prosecutors in their mendacity. One of these loons tried it on me. Fox So Cunning and Free is a prosecutor in a U.S. state, by the way, has some legal background here. Tried to get me fired when it didn't work. Lisa, have you seen police, the courts? Have you seen people in authority co-opted by this or convinced by it and enlisted to run the scam?
100%. In fact, some of the outrage that's happening right now in the best way, right? There's a lot of attention and there's a growing movement. A lot of adult children that this happened to and parents that have, just been completely deprived of their ability to parent and just been completely alienated and cut off from their children. Um, one thing that you will find in the research is that borderline narcissistic parents, they enlist like, the flying monkeys.
Flying
They're very
monkeys, yeah.
convincing. They get away with this for decades. They have gotten away with this for decades because they're very convincing. With therapists, can't see through it. Many good therapists really are confused by it, or they embrace like, oh, believe all women or whatever. So people are not objective. They're not looking for evidence. They're so absolutely like, and I think also law enforcement has been their hands have been tied a lot during these last decades, right? So because there's like nothing
How
you can
so?
do. Well, because the courts and I know the states are different, right? But I'm in Texas and it's a
Okay.
big state. It is not, I don't want to say it's leading the way, but it's a forerunner on this. We've got some really amazing um people that are really really spearheading legally some changes and things that are happening in all 50 states regarding this. But they basically, there was the law enforcement, their hands have been tied where, if you have a custody order and a parent doesn't turn over a child or says, oh, they don't want to go with you, well, we make our kids go to school. We make our kids do different things. We don't let kids call the shots, right? Until the last decade or two, right? Where people are allowing their kids to run everything. But, largely we're still responsible for our underage kids. They have to cooperate, right? But they will manipulate their children behind the scenes and then say, well, they won't go, or they can't force them, or I can't, physically move them, whatever. That kind of nonsense goes on. Because if it's legitimate, you need to take legal steps to establish
Yeah.
these children are terrified of a parent. You can't just
Yeah.
claim, something, right? So to me, there's a real pathway to go. But as far as law enforcement, there's nothing for a long time that they could do or were required to do. Now bills passed in all kinds of states. Texas in 2023 passed there's several that are in the works, but one of them is
Yeah.
that if you withhold that they give law enforcement the authority to take the order, and they're under an obligation to enforce the order. So if a parent does not turn over the child or produce the child, then they get a $500 fine. If they do it the second time, it's another $500. And if they do it a third time, it's like a three strikes, law, that if they do it the third time, it's a state jail felony. So Texas passed that in 2023, which is making an impact because before that it
Yeah.
was like, well,
I would say so.
law enforcement doesn't do anything, but
Well, I mean,
if
if you've got it, I mean, and I'm sure this is betraying my ignorance, but frankly,
Mhm,
I mean, this is a question any reasonable person would ask. If you've got a family court order, the fact that we even
mhm,
have family court
mhm,
is such an
mhm.
indictment of our society.
Yes.
But we do. If you've got a family court order that says we've got a 50-50 custody arrangement, whatever it is,
Mhm,
and one parent just simply says, no, I'm not going to, or lies, prevaricates, and
Mhm.
says, oh,
Mhm.
my daughter won't, she refuses.
Mhm.
What has been the problem with,
Mhm.
okay, then that's kidnapping. I'm a cop. I'm going to come to the house and get the child.
Right.
What's so difficult about that?
Right. Well, I mean, I'm not really sure, but I just think there was such a fumbling about with law enforcement
Yeah.
and family court and family law is just such a it's a disaster. It's
It makes me wonder,
yeah.
you said a minute ago that therapists, social workers, police officers, officers of the court
Mhm.
can be fooled
Mhm.
by these people because they're so convincing. And I know
Mhm.
that that's true in some cases.
Mhm.
Here's what I wonder. And this is straying into this is and it gets into subjectivity here. So
Mhm.
I'm not certain about
Mhm.
this. And here's how it seems to
Mhm.
me.
Mhm.
I don't claim I'm perfect. I don't have psychic powers, but I have a lot of personal experience, both direct personally in my life, in my face, but also through observation over years of people with cluster B traits and disorders.
Mhm.
So I've got a lot of personal experience. I know a lot of people who've been through it. I read, I watch, I observe. I've got a pretty good cluster B radar. I can't prove this to anybody, but when I've gone back to check my hit rate, it's pretty high. I can usually, of course, I won't know about the ones that I don't. When I'm fooled, I won't know that I'm fooled. I
Mhm.
understand that, right? But I can smell cluster B on people most of the time very quickly. It does not take long. I can be fooled. I'm sure I
Mhm.
can be fooled, but I don't think I can be fooled by the majority of people. I am
Mhm.
sensitive to, I pick it up through grooming appearance, bodily carriage, tone of voice, vocabulary choice, subject matter choice, all of these personal affect. I can smell this on people, right? Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So,
I'm so curious about that, but
well, I
it's
mean,
a rabbit trail.
maybe
But
you
no,
don't.
it's
I would
fascinating. No, I
imagine
think
that
it's
you
so
can
fascinating.
too. That anybody with this
Yes.
kind of experience
Mhm.
develops.
Mhm.
And when I say intuition, I don't mean, I
Mhm.
think people
Mhm.
sometimes hear intuition to mean something different than what I mean to express. I am not making a claim of woo woo metaphysical,
Right.
someone, I'm getting
Your
psychic
radar is
vibration.
attuned. Your
It's
radar is
radar,
very
right?
attuned. Yeah.
It's very attuned. So
Mhm.
yes, of course, there's an error rate and there's a false positive rate.
Mhm.
Obviously, I'm not
Mhm.
claiming that I'm perfect, but I'm very good. And
Mhm.
anybody who has extensive personal experience and who, here's the important part, and who has come out on the other side and realized that they were in a cluster B family, right?
Mhm.
The people who are still entrapped in it can't use their intuition this way, can sense this. So I wonder, are these people really that convincing, or is it that the majority of normal people just don't have enough experience? And like, for example, if you and I were sitting behind a two-way mirror and
Mhm.
we were watching, like, I am guessing that you and I would pick up on it quickly, whereas the person interviewing them might not. What do you think about this?
I totally agree. I think there's a couple of things that strike me about what you said. It's yes, I think first of all, people think about officers, therapists, especially that are enlisted to do this type of work for the court, right? They're just judges. They're going through one case after the other. Everybody they're coming in contact with is high conflict on some level. That's why you're at
Right.
court.
That's
You're
why
dealing
you're in
with
court.
all this
Yeah.
nonsense. And then you've got a lot of these people that can afford to do this are wealthy or have a level of wealth or they're very clever, right, in order to have the financial capacity to even continue on in a high conflict divorce or custody battle requires a certain tenacity and a certain amount
Yeah.
of financial stability or ability. So you're dealing with this certain population and which I think is probably annoying to people. And I
Yeah.
think that you become desensitized, right? Like if you're dealing with people that are dealing with real victims, right? And I do think children that go through this are terribly victimized. Okay. I think parents
Mhm.
that have this done to them are terribly victimized. Many parents kill themselves over this. When they get estranged from their kids reject
Oh
them. It's
God.
unbearable. There's a whole rash of suicides connected with this. It's disgusting, evil, wicked um stuff. It's not
Yeah.
lightweight. It has long-term um terrible effects on children and their ability to bond, to have good relationships, as you know, right? Just having a really difficult parent that has a personality disorder just comes with that as it is. But then to
Yeah.
find out that you had a good parent or someone that was just it was not justified for you to be alienated from and you're robbed of that. Many people when they find that out then cut off the parent that did that and now they've had two deaths, you know.
Yeah.
It's a disgusting evil. It's induced fatherlessness, motherlessness, orphanhood. It's a
Yeah.
crime. It's a spiritual crime. It's a crime against humanity all across the board. But yes, I do think that it is tricky. It's not that's why it's so important for the people that are involved and are on the front lines, the therapists that deal with this population, they should be educated enough to know the signs because if you see the signs, this is very easy. I could tell you, I could diagnose this all day long, whether I'm allowed to or not, or whatever.
Sure.
I can
Right.
because once those signs exist, and I have seen it in children, and it is unmistakable. You know what you're dealing with. And the fact that therapists are dealing with this population and not knowing what they're looking at and even get confused by a borderline or narcissistic parent
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
very disturbing because you're not looking at the parent, you're looking at the child's symptoms. The parent should be able to act any which way. When you see this in the child's symptom display, you should be able to know definitively because there is not an overlap in these symptoms with any other
Well, that's what you've said.
diagnosis.
This is actually positive because there's some really objective criteria
Yes.
that you
Yes.
can look at that discriminates this very cleanly from
Hmm.
other stuff, and that's
Hmm.
not the case with a lot of other mental syndromes.
That's right.
And a lot of these therapists, unfortunately, you know this. I mean, you know, as being part of
Hmm.
this field, that the number of incompetent or
Hmm.
undertrained
Hmm.
therapists, particularly when it comes to cluster B.
Hmm.
This is a particular
And you know
problem.
what? I
A lot
think
of
people
these
are
people can't even
worn out. They're
recognize it.
lazy. They're in the system. They're with a lot of like a lot of times wealthier parents that are fighting and they just chalk it up to divorce drama. They chalk it up to, well, the child's
Yeah.
just going to be screwed because the parents are
No,
ridiculous
no,
and they're
no.
not really doing their job, which is also a you know, it's unethical. It's
It
unethical for
is.
them to be practicing with this population and not know what they're looking at. When the children I have dealt with personally and have a front row seat to demonstrated this to me in front of me, I went to work into finding out what I'm looking at because I was not educated on this. And I found out what I'm looking at. So to be someone that the court would order into these situations day in and day
Yeah.
out, for judges to not know this is a crime
It it
for
sounds
guardian
like
ad
this is
litems or amicus attorneys to not know
yes.
this. Yeah.
It sounds to me like this is the subject matter. Information about this needs to become, and I have no
Mhm,
idea how much it is or isn't. But in all the states, this needs to become part of required
mhm,
continuing
mhm,
education certification for judges, lawyers, social
mhm,
workers, therapists, guardians ad litem, anybody who's
mhm.
dealing with these children. It sounds like this needs to be a required
Yes.
educational module. We've got a couple of comments here that I want to put up here. Ellen, $5. Thank you very much. Ellen says, "Why are there no Amber Alerts for children who are kidnapped by a parent and taken to a sanctuary state to be transitioned?" And I realize this is not what you're here. You're not here to
No,
talk
but
about
I'm all for it.
gender transitions, but it's yes, this is
Yeah.
it's been amazing to me to watch this because there is no more extreme form of child
Mhm,
abuse than
mhm,
what we call trans kids.
mhm,
There's
mhm,
nothing more extreme and abusive
mhm.
than colluding or developing and then colluding in a fantasy, a lie with the
Right.
child that actually disturbs their identity and makes them believe that there's someone in something that they're not
Right.
and cannot be. But then to go to the extreme of chemically poisoning them and then surgically mutilating their genitals. This is so astonishing. I lost a lot of faith. I didn't have a lot of faith in humanity to start with, but I lost most of the rest of what I had of it when I saw how many millions of Americans looked at that and didn't even get a frown on their face. Like, it didn't even register to them that it was abusive to surgically mutilate children. I couldn't believe
That's
what I was
crazy.
seeing. We've got another one. This may be really helpful. C. Horton Graham, $20. Thank you. Thank you very much. Says, what kind of material evidence of alienation does a parent need to gather for themselves in the early stages of alienation to protect themselves later?
Such a good question. Okay, so this has been like there's a lot of opinions on this. What I will say, the great news for parents going through this now is that there are apps that use AI and different things for the good, and you can insert the documentation is everything because these the judges, the therapists, they're so I think everyone's just so glazed over because they see so much and hear so much and they want it, this can be an issue where people think, oh, these are, just dumb parents arguing about this, that, and the other. They're never going to stop. This child's screwed. That can go on. So what you have to do is create a pattern. You document a pattern, not of your feelings, but like facts. This happened. There's
What
so
actually
many
happened?
apps. Yes, this happened on this day. If a child is withheld, they don't show up for their custody time. That you're showing that this is not in the best interest of a child, and that they're breaking the court order. They are actively withholding a child. They're actively not cooperating with co-parenting and things like that. It's creating that documentation. That's kind of everything to courts. Now, I will say there's just so many corrupt courts that I think you hear about. It changes from district to district and region to region,
Right.
but the documentation, I think across the board, anyone who's doing anything on this in this realm will tell you documentation is everything. You want to establish a pattern of what is going on, what the child says, what they post, when they call, don't respond, don't show up. You just have to document so that you can show an objective pattern of what's going on.
Yeah. And I would guess that another thing the parent would want to document, you're going to have to take notes on this. You have to write down what happens in
Mhm.
front of you. I would guess that you would want to document behavioral changes in your children and
Mhm.
attitude changes that seem related to. I mean, I'm spinning this off the
Mhm.
top of my
Mhm.
head. Not
Mhm.
as I don't do the work that you do, Lisa. I don't see
Mhm.
these people
Mhm.
every day, so I'm imagining this. But I would imagine that if my kid came home from a custody weekend with mom and had a terrible attitude with me, mouthing off to
Mhm.
me, putting me in my place, maybe saying, maybe dropping some
Mhm.
hints in
Mhm.
what they're saying inadvertently, well, you're not validating or you're blah blah blah. That
Mhm.
kind of behavior from a child, I would think you would want to write that and date that down too.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, absolutely. Because one of the things that you will see from children that this is happening to is they will use adult language. They'll use
Ah,
terminology that is
good
not,
one.
that you wouldn't hear from, a child. You will frequently get things, the disrespect and like the haughty, arrogant disrespect
Yep.
will look like calling, a parent a sperm donor, an egg donor, devaluing, diminish because you will see the splitting, right? That you see in
Woo
borderlines, right?
wee.
Okay, so you will see the all good angelic parent and the demonic, disgusting monster parent. So you will also get the language that goes with that. So you will see the devaluation that you see with borderlines because the child will be mimicking, the parent that is doing this. They will be adopting their narrative, right? So you'll see some of that. The attitude is just them reflecting, that
Right.
parent. So you will see, so yes, you will see all of those things and you will hear it. And you will also see which is really, really honestly very creepy to witness, but you'll see that deadpan stare on children, young children
Really.
that will say, yes, I've seen a child come home and say, I don't want a father. Deadpan
Just
stare.
like blank
Nothing,
eyes.
nothing. I don't want a child. I don't want a father. I
What is
don't.
going on? What's
Yeah.
going on with that? What's going on
Mhm.
psychologically in that moment,
Mhm.
right?
It's just that
For that
they have,
child.
they have been I liken it to like Stockholm syndrome.
Hmm.
In order to survive, they have to join the oppressor. And they It is so when you talk to the adult survivors, right, who went through this and now they came to the understanding of what happened to them,
Yeah, they
they
must
will
have
tell
really
you.
interesting.
Yes, they do. And it's just the thing is, it's so sad when you listen to them because they will tell you all at once that there's nothing you really could have done. They were so
Okay.
dead. So they were so brainwashed. They were so set in their survival skills, but
Yeah.
at the same time, they feel very angry that the other parent didn't do more to jailbreak them out of it, right?
Sure.
Even though they
Of
know
course.
there's nothing you could do, but I was a child and you should have done more.
It's a natural feeling,
Yes. So it's
those
it's just
contradictory
it's
feelings.
very sad because for the parents that wish they could do more, you really run the risk of doing damage, of tearing your child in half if you do too much, right? So
Yep.
if you go to war, then you've got the Solomon narrative where do you split the baby in half? Like because when you covertly or overtly demean, diminish, and demonize a parent, that child is half of that parent. They're
Yeah.
fundamentally going to feel that they are in some way as evil, wicked, or dark as the parent, right? So this is the problem with one of the many problems of doing this. And you will find children being very self-destructive. That's another symptom that you start to see. You've got eating disorders, you've got self-destructive behavior,
Yes.
cutting, suicidal
Yes.
ideation, because they're so trained not to say. They will lie to therapists, they will lie to you, they will just deceive everyone to their own detriment to protect that parent. It's just so profound. So you
It's
have to
awful.
know what you're seeing. Yeah.
And I can imagine there are going to be cases, there are going to be family situations that are more complicated and difficult to tease out because this many horrible things are true at the same time, and you
Hmm.
can't place
Hmm.
all the blame on one side of the ledger.
Right.
So,
Yes.
you know, a personal example, um, you know, my mother is fully borderline and narcissistic. I mean, she's absolutely diagnosably cluster B in every way. And my stepfather growing up, my brother and sister are technically my half brother and sister. I'm the firstborn, and
Hmm.
my mother
Hmm.
married him when I was almost 4 years old. I never met my own father, but my brother and sister came along, and my stepfather was in fact violent. He beat my mother, he beat me, he molested my sister. I'm not saying anything that's not already public
Hmm.
information.
Hmm.
My sisters talked about this too. And there was one night, and actually I remember this. This is the frustrating part. There are some members of our extended family who are good people. Um, but they, for a long time, did not believe that my stepfather tried to kill my mother. They thought that was another one of my mother's lies because my mother is a
Hmm.
known pathological liar. But my sister and I watched it. We were there. I can see it. I watched
Hmm.
him try to strangle her, right? So, but at the same time, nothing justifies this, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Nothing justifies this level of near homicidal abuse. But at the same time, for years, like many borderline women do, my mother deliberately instigated a lot of his violence. That doesn't excuse him, but she
Hmm.
pushed him into it because she liked creating conflict scenarios. And she knew
Hmm.
what she was going to get. She knew what she was going to get, and she'd do it anyway. So if you can imagine a kid who's in a family where you've got a borderline mother who may be, in fact, being
Hmm.
victimized
Hmm.
by an abusive narcissistic
Hmm.
father, but she's also a complete lying bitch.
Right.
Right? Like, how are
Exactly.
you how are you
This
going to
is
tease this out as an officer of the court, you know?
right. So that's so fair and that's so real because it's not all black and white. Like, we don't like I think I'm very cognizant of not, creating the same splitting that
Yes.
the mentally ill person is doing, right? Like it's not all black and white. That's what I'm saying. Like you're talking about normal range. Like there is justified alienation, if you're
Sure, of
terrorizing your
course. Yeah.
family,
You
yes.
should be alienated from
Right.
someone who
Right.
wants you
But
dead.
this cannot be determined willy-nilly. You have to go, if
Right.
someone is being criminally dangerous, you establish that. You don't just get to say, "Oh, I think my child was diddled." I'm sorry, you cannot do that. You have to do something, right? Because everybody has done that. Like so many people have done that. It's really terrible.
I'm
Um,
sorry. I'm laughing
no.
sympathetically, but this is one of the things about Disaffected is that we talk
Mhm.
about the most horrible things and then we also laugh at them at exactly the
Believe
same
me,
time.
I
So
understand. I understand.
I've got like I'm hearing you. I want to record your voice. I've got to find a product for this, but you're the pitch woman, and I'm hearing you say, "Hey, hey, someone diddled my kid."
I mean, I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm not in any way making light, but it is that
I
there's an
know.
absurdity to this, right? If you're dealing with borderline people, narcissistic people, there's always some measure of this absurdity, right? To all the things that people do and the asinine things that they, the tactics they deploy, et cetera, right? So
Do you know
there's
what this
always
reminds?
that.
Yes, it is. It's
Mhm,
absurd. It's absurd. I'm
mhm,
laughing just thinking about it. But the claim, the claim
mhm.
that some dude cut out her breast implants and then threw them against the wall is so ridiculous. But do you know what it brings to mind? I don't know if there's a connection deeper than just my screwed up brain. This that's the kind of claim. I think there is a connection, and I think that connection is cluster B pathology. I know I'm not an expert, but I know quite a bit more than the average layperson about the what people variously call the satanic panic of the 1980s, the daycare
Mhm, mhm,
molestation and
mhm,
satanic ritual abuse
mhm,
craze that went on, recovered memories,
mhm.
et cetera, et cetera. Now, here's my proviso. Okay, audience, you have to listen. I'm giving you a very fair not all here. Okay, there are, of course, ritual abuse cases. There
Yes.
are there are completely depraved parents who have done things to their children that you think only happen in fictional movies. That's real. There
Yes.
are people who have remembered things that I don't know if you want to call it repression or something else that came to mind later that they couldn't deal with earlier. That does happen. I'm not saying it isn't real. What I am saying is the majority of this craze that happened from the mid 80s, mostly through the early 90s, when it was all over the news. It started with the McMartin preschool case in California, where the preschool owners, the family that owned it, were prosecuted. Some of them were jailed over the most absurd and fantastical stories of child abuse. But this reminds me of the claims that were commonly made by children, abused children, coached
Mhm,
children,
mhm,
co-opted
mhm,
children in those days. They would tell police and social workers and therapists claims like, yeah, they took us to a church and they made a girl have a baby and then they killed the baby on the altar and they made me eat the baby and then he stuck a knife in my vagina. Like 5 and 6 year olds that's a real claim,
mhm,
stuck a
mhm,
knife in my
mhm,
vagina.
mhm.
Nobody, nobody at the time who was taking this testimony, I know it sounds ridiculous and I can't explain it, but nobody, if somebody stuck a knife in a child's genitals, there would be physical evidence of this, and nobody
Right.
thought to confirm it,
This is so
right?
crazy.
It's
Yeah.
that absurd. It strikes me as the same
Mhm,
thing, and I think the
mhm.
same psychopathology is probably a through line in
Yes.
both of these.
Yes. Because the thing is we're talking about things that are truly like the darkest
Yeah,
shit you've ever heard, right? So you cannot, and there are things that can be proven. Their evidence will exist. Now, even in parental alienation behaviors or exhibits or whatever, you will see the fingerprints of the pathology. Okay,
okay,
that's what like Dr. Childress talks about. You will see those things. We live in the United States. You have to prove things. You don't get to just make claims with no proof. We have a due process in this country. We have constitutional rights. Parents
right.
have the right to have control and access to their children. A lot of this is there's a huge war starting surrounding this because family courts do not follow the Constitution. They do not follow the law.
No, they sure as shit don't.
They do not. And so what you're having is people can make a claim and do so, and it's obviously so convoluted because if that's really going on, this is like it's like call the FBI, the CIA, the Coast Guard, and the, I mean, the military, the Marines, right? Like you want
Hmm.
everyone on the cases of true um harm to children, right? Like but the problem is you've got so many bullshitters out here that are deciding, to utilize this sort of like place in the law that is so willy-nilly that they're just making false claims and all that. And honestly, and I think there is, there's legislation being, written up about all kinds of things. One of the things that a lot of people press for is if you make false allegations, you should serve time. I mean, doing this to children is
Yes,
criminal.
yes.
It should be criminal.
This
People
needs to
should
be
go to
punishable
jail.
by
Yes.
actual consequences,
Yes.
actual jail. You
Because
know?
because it's as damaging by all measures that I've seen in research on this. It's as damaging as sexually abusing a child because
Yeah,
you are emotionally fusing with and you are co-opting a child's entire childhood to help regulate you instead of let them live their childhood and let them figure out parents and grandparents and be a norm like honestly we all have to do. Who's got perfect parents and perfect
right.
grandparents and perfect family? We all have to deal with some of the wild characters in our lives, and we don't just you don't just chop off the limbs, unless there's gangrene. You don't just terminate relationships just on a whim or because you're pissed off or you feel slighted or you feel vengeful or what have you.
I want to
There needs
underline
to. Mhm,
I want to underline and reinforce your point about how damaging this is. That it's as I'm glad that
mhm,
you said it, Lisa, as directly and plainly as you did. This is hard for it's going to take a long time for more people to really take this on board, and it's always worth underlining. Um, yes, this would be as damaging, as
mhm,
scarring as
mhm,
direct physical sexual abuse, and I extend that out to real emotional abuse from a
mhm,
cluster B
mhm,
parent is as, or in my opinion, sometimes more damaging than actual physical hands-on abuse.
mhm,
And this was brought home to me a few years ago, several years ago, more than a few now, but during a conversation with my therapist um, about the effects of emotional abuse. We were talking about the fact I was not sexually molested by direct physical molestation. Nobody diddled me, right?
mhm,
No adult did that to me in early childhood. If they did, I certainly don't remember it. Happened to my sister, did not happen to me. But I there was a sense in my as I think this is common in a lot of cluster B homes. There was a I didn't have the words for it as a kid, but I had a sense and an intuition from childhood that there was something dark and inappropriate about the atmosphere in our home.
mhm,
I know that sounds really vague. I'm
mhm,
sorry, I can't be more specific. But what my therapist said to me, he goes, this is an example of emotional abuse, and that not all sexual abuse is actually physical hands on
mhm,
molestation. He
mhm,
says, you, Josh, display
mhm.
all of the classic signs of a child who was sexually abused. And he's
Wow.
right. As a teenager,
Mhm,
promiscuous, early
mhm,
alcoholic, um, suicidal gestures and ideation. I mean, for a time, I think I was probably qualified for a borderline personality diagnosis myself, as is often the case with people who
mhm,
are sexually abused. But he said, this is an example. This children like you were in fact sexually abused and have the outcomes of sexual abuse, even though nobody put their hands on your genitals and nobody
mhm,
penetrated you.
mhm.
So, what,
Absolutely.
with emotional abuse, whether it has a sexual component or not, it really does fuck a child up
Yes.
emotionally to the same degree and often worse than getting hit with a belt.
Mhm, mhm. Without doubt. And I have an example. I totally validate that absolutely clocks with me and my experience. Um, and to your point, I have known children that have gone through this sort of thing that Well, first of all, even if a child, many of these parents make these allegations, like I've said before, when the children are young and they have fuzzy
Mhm.
memories, right?
Right.
But
It's very
telling,
convenient,
mhm,
isn't it?
yes, yes, because you can absolutely implant memories very easily as a mother or
Yes.
father of a child. You can get them to believe just
Yep.
about anything. Very easy to do. Um, so my whole point with that is that if a lot of these parents, and I have witnessed this, oh my gosh, over and over, is that parents will tell children, your dad touched you, your dad did this. Saying that to a child, even if it happened, is abusive. There is no reason in the world to
Okay.
sexualize a child that is not of a sexual age, appropriate age. There is no reason to implant fear and knowledge of terrible, disgusting things in the mind of a young child, period. There may be a time as they grow older and they start to have symptoms and maybe they don't understand it. And there's a whole therapeutic process for that. There's no reason to tell a 7-year-old, yeah, I walked in and your uncle was touching
No, of course.
right. There's no reason to implant that. There's no
No,
benefit. There's not useful to tell a child that. So you are sexualizing,
no.
even if it were true,
Yes.
right?
That is a really good point. I would not have thought of
Mhm,
that, but it makes perfect sense. And it raises it. Well, it's a question for another time, another
mhm,
context, maybe. But the question it brings up for me is, what is the healthful, appropriate, and
mhm.
non-damaging response that a parent could have to a child who's under 10 years old, for example, who comes and says, daddy or mommy touched me here.
Yeah.
How do you how do you how do you validate that so the
Mhm,
child
mhm,
is knows that he or she is heard and will be
mhm.
protected
Sure, sure.
without then layering on more additional sexualization to that?
For one thing, that's a criminal act, okay, that people forget. This is a high crime. So you take legal and practical action. I would call law enforcement. I would have my child forensically evaluated and videoed. I would have an expert interview them. I would not reinforce this. I would create a lot of safety and comfort, and I'm here for you, and you want to create that all the time for your children. You don't want to be hysterical. You don't want to react. You want to, like, you're safe here. Thank you for sharing with me. But that's a criminal allegation. That's a serious criminal allegation, maybe the worst you can make, right? So
Yeah,
you need to take
it's about the
appropriate
worst.
action. And so contacting, the authorities and having a child interviewed by somebody who is well trained to deal with that would be my first option.
Okay.
So because it forensically evaluated, and usually they record those things, and you can really do that. This is what I'm always like, if you really think this has happened, there are people who are literally forensic evaluators that deal with this. So have them do that. Have them do their job.
Do you think
Don't
do you think
reinforce
they
this
are
to your
are they
children.
are they
Mhm,
trustworthy? Because and here's why I ask this.
mhm,
And I know times have changed, but
mhm,
let's go
mhm,
back 40 years to
mhm,
the McMartin preschool case, for example, or many others like them. There were allegedly professional forensic evaluators with these children who, and some of them I don't think they even meant to do wrong, but they ended up confabulating with the
mm,
children and making up a stories. How do
yeah.
we know these professionals are on the up and up and are not even inadvertently furthering the damage?
Yeah, no, I think that's so fair. I don't think there's a perfect solution here. Okay. I think
Yeah,
that
of course
the
not.
one thing that you can make sure you have is a video evidence, you know, so that if that other professionals can come in and scrutinize
Yeah,
what goes on.
being the interview with the child needs to be
Yes.
recorded. Yeah,
Yes. And so you have those sort of things. I don't know that there's a perfect thing. I'm sure it depends on a lot of the circumstances. And I'm with you. Like, I don't totally just um I don't trust, I wouldn't trust, if it was my child, I wouldn't trust anybody. I would be so
yeah,
meticulous. I would be there through everything, but I would certainly make sure it was videoed and it was available for scrutiny. and it was as safe as possible, and it was, as least amount of damage on the child as possible. But it has to be, you have to go through the proper channels so that perpetrators can be prosecuted,
Yeah.
and you're preserving evidence, and you're doing all the right things so that it doesn't happen again or happen to somebody else's child. So I don't think there's a perfect process. I mean, the legal system is not perfect by any means, but you want to do the wisest, um take the wisest steps you can and damage your child the absolute least. So
Yeah.
I think that sometimes that does depend, and you have to use, your kind of parental wisdom. But what we do know is not helpful is for parents to, um be willy-nilly about the stuff, and to be telling your kids the details of, and what I was getting to even in regards to that is that I know parents who, in order to alienate their children, will tell, I mean, children will spout off. I've heard children spout off things like that they will describe their other parents' genitals.
Oh,
Like, not just in
really?
a, oh yes, which is
Oh,
extraordinarily unnatural, by the way, to be
yes.
talking about your parent, even to insult a parent. But there are children that I've heard, and I was talking about earlier, that it's very frequent that children that go through this, they'll call their parent, a sperm donor, an egg donor. They'll devalue them, they'll dehumanize them, because they hear the other
Are we
parent doing
talking?
this.
Are we talking about kids with a borderline mother who will say things
Yes,
like
yes,
"my
yes,
dad's
yes.
small dick"?
Yes, yes. But you know what? The thing is I think if a kid said a small, that's such a common insult, but when
Mm.
you're more descriptive than that, it's a giant red flag.
Oh
Okay.
God,
So,
yes.
what you can know almost certainly is a borderline or narcissistic parent has spouted off their private sexual details to their child to devalue and rage against their
Which,
ex.
which, I just stopped myself. I have histrionic traits, as if that weren't obvious. So I just stopped myself from over egging something. I was going to say always. It's not always.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
it is so common.
yeah.
It is so common for a borderline mother
Mhm.
to um to as part of the enmeshment process to
Mhm.
overshare with a
Yes.
child about their. I mean, this is one of the
Mhm.
classic symptoms of the borderline mother, is that the child knows something about the intimate details of the marriage or the sexual
Yes.
relationship that they shouldn't. I don't remember how old I was, but I was a minor, and this was not out of the ordinary. I don't remember a lot of times like this, but this did not strike me as a weird thing to hear from my mother. One day we're sitting there in the living room talking with the television on, and she just as if I were her 40-year-old girlfriend, turns to me, says, your stepfather was one of the most undersexed men I've ever had. He
Yeah.
just never wanted to have sex. And I'm sitting here going, I it's disgusting to even recall the memory, but it is
Well, but
disgusting. But
this goes to what you're talking
these
about. That
women
is
will, these
sexual abuse.
borderline will, that is
Yes.
sexual abuse.
That's why
Yeah.
your display was that of a sexual abuse victim, because
Right.
this type of information that parents heap on a child, that not only is their brain not developed enough to process this appropriately, but it's a complete violation of,
Thank you.
like, a
That's exactly the word.
generational. It's a
I,
violation of, this child has the right to not know about their another adult genitals, another adult, your
and you can
mother's or your
feel it.
father's
I
sex
mean,
life. Yes.
that just, I'm betting anybody that heard that probably had the same emotional feeling in their gut that I had when I had it. Because even if you don't have the vocabulary for it, I, I knew this was wrong. Like
Mhm.
I was so humiliated. If I could have melted into the floor and gone to the center of the earth, I would have, just to get out of the room. That something is being violated when that
Mhm.
happens, even if you
Mhm.
don't understand exactly what's going on.
Well, you're sexualizing a child. Fundamentally, you're sexualizing a child that is abusive. Children should not, under any circumstances, be sexualized. There is a time and a place for children to learn appropriately about sexual things, and it's not when they're 7, 8, and 9. They should not know about your sex life. They don't need to. And I think, you will, I'm going to say 9 times out of 10, that you will find that these mothers in particular overshare, and really heavily burden their young children with adult information, which is abusive. It's too heavy, it's a burden, it's overwhelming to them, and they feel like they've got to rescue that parent, and they have to carry that parent's adult burdens and experiences when they're not developed enough. They don't
Well,
have the bandwidth, their
that's
brains
right.
are not developed enough. And it's like instead of that parent carrying their own burdens, they hoist it upon their child, and that robs them of their childhood. It robs them of their innocence.
This is exactly right, and it's a trite phrase, and it's probably overused, so people have become a little desensitized to it. But in a very real sense, these sorts of things you're talking about, some of them are experiences I had as a child. This really does take childhood away from you.
It does.
You know, children with parents like this did not actually have a childhood the
Mhm,
way people think
mhm,
of having a childhood.
mhm,
It's destroyed.
mhm. I completely agree. And it can be really like, swept under the rug and minimized. But when you see the outworking, and again, going back to what your therapist said to you, that you're presenting with these symptoms of something that you didn't experience in that way, but it's
Right.
because you get like brain raped by your parents doing all this really
Thank you.
crazy stuff.
Thank you.
And you get exposed. It's the same as like sexualizing your kid or exposing them to explicit material or not guarding them on the internet, getting them unfettered
Yes.
access to porn and, predators and all that. A lot of borderline parents also do that. They allow their children to have unfettered access to like crazy adult
Yeah, because
content.
they think it's normal,
Yeah, or they just honestly, they're so
or they
preoccupied with
don't care.
themselves, or they want their kids to like them and be at their house or whatever the case may be. They're
Want to
not
be the fun
they're
parent.
actually yeah, they're not actually protecting them, so they're being exposed to online predators and, all kinds of crazy adult content and like the wildest porn that, you know, no one's ever seen, before the last decade or two in all of history, human history. These kids are being completely, inundated, with adult content from their parents' trauma to, pornographic images to all kinds of, and other people just, predators and people, just all kinds of weird stuff that's going on. No one is protecting these children. It's a crime. It's literally like a crime against humanity to be operating like this, and then to just not take care of your own issues, but to hoist them upon your child and make them responsible for rescuing you is
Yeah.
so backwards and so twisted and so deranged.
Well,
And that's
that's
the essence of, parental alienation or malicious. The reason why the terminology I keep on saying it is because there's a huge internal fight over this, like
okay.
because people want to fight over the term parental alienation because it's not in the DSM.
Oh, for
When
God's
really,
sake. I get
exactly,
so
instead of
sick of these
just, yes,
terminology.
I know, me too, me too.
Here's what I would say. If any of them would listen to me, this would be my suggestion to them. Because I've seen the outcome of these stupid terminology fights.
Mhm.
And a lot of this comes down to God bless you, academics, but you're so fucking disconnected from what real people understand about the world. Get out of your academic
Exactly.
bubble.
Mhm,
Stop trying to make the world conform to your
mhm,
terminology. It's not
mhm.
actually that important, and you're screwing up meaning. This happened with the renaming of manic depression to
Yes,
bipolar
yes,
disorder.
yes.
Okay. Now,
Mhm.
and well, not just now, for at least 30 years, we've had complete public confusion of borderline personality disorder
Mhm.
with manic
Mhm.
depression because
Yes.
they both start, now it's called bipolar, and
Mhm.
they look similar on the surface because sometimes they're really happy and sometimes they're really sad. So almost nobody in the general public knows the difference between manic depression and borderline personality.
Yep.
Practitioners are, this is my personal opinion, can't prove it, but I'm sticking by it. The vast majority of actual bipolar / manic depression diagnoses are misdiagnoses. 9 times out of 10, it's actually borderline personality disorder, not manic depression.
Mhm.
That's another one. But they also have done this, Lisa, with Munchausen syndrome by proxy.
Yes.
And I still, like, I deal with this sometimes and just, I get people hammering at me. No, that's not its name. Its name is factitious
Mhm.
disorder
Mhm.
imposed on another. Sit and spin.
Right.
Um, no,
It doesn't again,
here's the thing.
this disorder by any other name is still what it is.
It's
It's
still the
still
thing.
the
And
thing.
this is what I would say to clinicians and
Mhm.
academics and researchers. Keep your eye on the actual
Yes.
goal. The actual
Right.
goal is to get the public and your colleagues and professionals conversant and aware of
Mhm.
accurate information about a syndrome. Stop niggling
Mhm.
over
Mhm.
terminology, because Frank, I know this because
Mhm.
I've been a professional in different areas,
Mhm.
and I know how nomenclature works. And
Mhm.
a lot of this is wanting to look smarter than your
Yeah.
colleagues because you're more accurate and you know all the clinical terminology.
Mhm.
This is not important. So what I would have said to the mental health industry is stop renaming, let it go.
Mhm.
Don't come up with factitious disorder. Accept that people call it Munchausen. Accept it. Just
Right.
accept it.
Well,
Everyone
and here's
knows
the
what
thing.
it is,
What,
right?
are we any longer even concerned about, for instance, the children that are being torn away, like being
Right.
creating the orphan making that's going on? Now we're
Right.
focused on, well, that's not in the DSM, so we can't do this and we have to rally. No, it's psychological abuse of a child. There's all
Yeah.
kinds of outworkings. You can have persecutory delusions. You can have all kinds of things. Okay.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it is already in the DSM as several things. The most obvious
Yeah.
is it's psychological abuse of a child. We don't need to procrastinate and prolong helping children and families get relief from this
Right.
insanity that's super destructive. And when
Yeah.
there's millions of children suffering from this, never mind the parents that are suicidal, the parents who are losing hope, the parents, the families that are being drained by the legal system to just have access to their child. There's so many crimes going on in this. You're
Yeah.
impoverishing families. You are just to defend themselves against false allegations, just for one.
Sure.
You've got all kinds of nonsense going on that is destroying families. That is so it's evil. It's wicked, it's evil fundamentally. And we're fighting over if something's in the DSM or if we're going to call it this or that or the other
Yeah.
thing. It doesn't freaking matter. I mean, if people relate, parental alienation, it rings a bell with a lot of people. That's why people use
Right.
it,
And that's what
you know?
and that's a good thing. Anything
Hmm.
that the
Hmm.
public recognizes, if you can use that as a hook to keep their
Hmm.
ears open and give them information, use it to your benefit rather than trying to
Yes.
fight it.
And
So,
we're now we're creating confusion and people don't know which way is up. And then meanwhile, children are being, destroyed. And
right.
while we're fighting over this nonsense. So I think it's another a lack of ethics. It needs to just stop and get on with the business of actually helping innocent people.
I agree. Well, Lisa, this has been a great conversation. You've been very generous with your time. We've been talking about this for 2 hours, and this is why I like the live stream. We can do things on this and have these in-depth conversations that are harder to do on a 1 hour show. I really want to thank you for educating me and educating the audience about this, and also letting us know that there's some good news, that this is a
Mhm.
topic that's being re-examined. People are taking it seriously. It sounds like there's some legislative efforts happening in many of the states to make this easier to punish. So as we
Yes.
wrap up here, um, let everybody know people are interested. I've given them some they're from you. I've given them some jumping off points that you supplied, some videos that some organizations, Dr. Craig Childress's work, all of
Mhm.
that is linked in the description underneath this video. But if people want to find out more about you and your work, where can they find you online?
I sent you the information because I really am. I'm always word of mouth, so I'm not prepared for this.
Okay,
But
no
I'm
problem.
affiliated with Live Your True Life Institute. My dear
Okay.
friend Ashley Burgess runs it. I work, kind of tunneled through her, but I'm just starting to take more clients on. I've
Mhm.
been word of mouth only for a lot of years. So, but
Okay.
live your true life. And I can be found online through that. And then if you want to
Will
post
people
what I
find you
sent
under
you,
the name Lisa Davis, or will they find you under another name?
they'll find me under my other name, which I'm still trying to sort out. But Lisa
Okay.
Davis is under Live Your True Life Institute.
Okay.
So
Excellent.
that's my but if we get into the other topics we've discussed, off,
Mhm.
before, then we can dive into my
Sure.
my
No
original
problem.
last name. That just opens
Okay.
up a whole other can of worms.
I get it. Not worth it. Not worth it. Lisa, thank you so much. Thank you for the good work you're doing. Thank
Yeah,
you for
thank
reaching
you
out
for
to me
having
and
me.
making me aware of it and then coming on the show to share it with other people. I really appreciate your
Yeah,
time.
it's a
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Thank you for your work. I really, really appreciate all you're doing and the price you pay, to do it. So I want to honor you publicly for that. I
Well,
really
thank
respect it.
you. I appreciate that. All right, folks and audience, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your great conversation and comments. We appreciate you. As always, if you like what you get here, definitely, whether you're on Rumble or YouTube, please subscribe to us and hit the notification bell. Just subscribing, just hitting the subscribe. I didn't understand this for a while, but there's a reason why podcasters like me and everybody else, I know it's annoying, but we say it for a reason. YouTube is a mess. And you can hit subscribe, but that does not mean that you're now going to get notifications for everything. You have to take step 2. Well, click the notification bell and decide what to blah, blah. Here's, if you want to be notified anytime something goes up, subscribe, notification bell, select all notifications. Do not choose personalized. Do not choose some. Do not let the algorithm decide for you. So do that. And of course, our show is coming out every Sunday at 9 p.m. on Rumble, YouTube, and Twitter. And we will have another good one for you this Sunday at 9. Lisa Davis, audience, thank you guys. And we'll see you next week on Thursday.
Thank you.
Sweet dreams you can't resist. N-E-S-T-L-E-S. A dream as sweet as this. N-E-S-T-L-E-S. Creamy white, dreamy white. Nestle makes the very best. N-E-S-T-L-E-S. Sweet dreams you can't resist.